Every pregnancy is different. Every birth is different. So why do we often talk about recovery as if it's the same for everyone? Postpartum recovery looks different for every woman, but the support we're given, it's often limited, inconsistent, or missing altogether. We often talk about what the body goes through during labour and birth, but far less about what happens after. Once the baby arrives, there's this quiet expectation that your body will just recover. You're given a 6-week postpartum check and sometimes receive a leaflet about recovery, but then you're left to figure out the rest on your own. Pain, weakness, leaking, heaviness, these things might be common, but common doesn't mean normal, and it doesn't mean you should have to live with them. Yet for many women, proper recovery is something you only access if you have the time, the money, or the right connections. But recovery shouldn't be a privilege, it's a right for all women. Did you know that in countries like France, postpartum recovery is treated as standard care? All women receive a full abdominal check around 6 weeks after birth, followed by a structured rehabilitation programme fully funded by the state. These checks assess things like organ position, pelvic floor function, and abdominal separation. And recovery doesn't stop there. Women are supported with a 12-week rehab programme focused on rebuilding strength, posture, and core function. In the UK, by contrast, many women receive only a handful of postnatal appointments, often centred on the baby rather than the mother's recovery. Now, the NHS is something we're incredibly fortunate to have in the UK, and the professionals working within it are doing vital, often under-recognised work in women's health. But I think it's also fair to ask, can we be doing more to support women during pregnancy and postpartum? I'm your host, Katie O'Malley, journalist, broadcaster, and founder of A Long Way to Go. And today we'll be exploring what postpartum recovery actually looks like and what women should know, but so often aren't given clarity to talk about. And to do this, I'm joined by Olivia de Maigret. Olivia is a registered osteopath with a deep focus on women's health and maternal care. She is also the co-founder of 4Mamas, which is an incredible London-based company offering antenatal classes and maternity concierge, led by medical experts focusing on each of the 4 motherhood stages: fertility, pregnancy, birth, postpartum. She was also the model for Mother Verite, a statue unveiled last year between the sculptor Raven de Klerk and Frida that honoured the art and realities of motherhood. What I love about Olivia's work is her whole body approach. During her appointments, she'll discuss everything from your lifestyle and movement to exercise, sex, and everything in between. Olivia, welcome to A Long Way to Go.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for coming. So to kick off, what I think is really important when it comes to postpartum recovery is to understand what the body is actually recovering from. Because whether it's a vaginal birth or a cesarean section, this is a huge physical event. So from a physical perspective, what has the body gone through during pregnancy and birth?
What you need to understand is becoming a mom is a transformation. And I really like the analogy as if you look at what you go through puberty and growth spurt. It's a hormonal-dependent event, so it's very global. So in terms of bodies, every woman will, as you said, will have something different depending on the outcome of the birth. But they all go through the same in terms of they're growing someone, which is the equivalent of running a marathon daily. And that will have an effect on the whole system.
What systems are most affected? Musculoskeletal, pelvic floor, core, nervous system?
The body goes through a whole transformation. As I said, it's a hormonal-dependent transformation. And hormones affect every system, whether it's visceral, digestive, whether it's musculoskeletal, whether it's also neurologic. What is important, where my area of expertise is the musculoskeletal system. And this is the equivalent of a growth spur. So everything will move and go into dimension that they never been before. The uterus will grow up to 30 times his normal size. So you need to have your whole body capable of supporting those transformations.
What is happening to the pelvic floor during pregnancy?
Okay. During pregnancy, you are going through, it's a hormonal-dependent transformation, right? So the pelvic floor will contribute to that and will be affected by that. One of the primary role of pelvic floor is to support all your digestive and vital organs. And for female, the babies. I think what I would really like to touch on right now, because we're talking about that, is whether you're having a C-section or whether you're having a vaginal birth, the pelvic floor will need some work at some point. And it's really important to keep that in mind when you're going to come to recovery.
I think that's something that a lot of people don't think about as well, depending on whether it's planned or an unexpected C-section, is that, oh, the pelvic floor won't be affected because I'm not having a vaginal birth. But it is going to be affected regardless of the way that you give birth.
Yeah.
And what are the most common postpartum symptoms women experience? And which of these are often dismissed, would you say, during pregnancy?
I think let's go through a few stats. Is 1 out of 3 women could experience incontinence postpartum. I think out of vaginal birth, 90% of women might have a tear, okay? And 50% will still have to work on diastasis recti. So I think this is like around the long line. And I think what is really important is to remember that urinary incontinence, those things, they're not just the symptoms, they're a marker that you haven't fully recovered. Everyone who comes to my clinic, I have to dig a bit in terms of question, because some of them don't even know that it could be a symptom, but hemorrhoid could be a symptom. You know, your small bulge of your tummy, that's the symptoms. Constipation can be a symptom. Pain is a symptom. Back pain is a symptom. So I think the message I want to say now is really, when it comes to recovery or to talk about your symptoms, lay them out, because they will help whoever you have in front of you to direct you to whatever treatment or rehabilitation is tailored for you.
And you said as well that you have to dig a bit deeper to find out what people are actually suffering from, what symptoms. Why do you think you have to dig a bit deeper? Is it because people may not understand what they're going through, perhaps what is common or what's normal? They might have embarrassment. They might never have spoken about their body in this way. Why do you think you have to press a bit more to get these details out?
I think there's a society taboo, you know. I was at my girls' school yesterday and I was talking to them of what do I do. And I said, my work is with kids, you know what, my work is this. And I mainly look after pee and caca. And, you know, everyone, even the teacher were laughing. So I think there's a bit of, you know, taboo around that. So when you bring that into a clinic, you have a really raw person who doesn't even know where to start. So there's taboo, there's fear, and there's also not knowing, not understanding that could be something leading to something more dramatic later during the line. Mm. But I think, you know, if you have someone that digs, is also because, you know, it's necessary. And one of the biggest one, the myth I have, is when I ask people how many times they go to the bathroom, they have no idea. They don't know if it's like 3 times a day, 7 times a day. And that's actually a really nice benchmark to understand how your bladder works and what are your pelvic floor habits. So yeah, if someone asks you this question, don't think it's out of the blue and it's completely, you know, uncommon. It is something really practical to understand how your recovery is going.
And what would you say is the difference between something being very common in terms of symptoms postpartum and something that's normal, quote unquote normal? Because I think something that's common for one or normal, it's really difficult when we're using these words, because everyone's recovery, everyone's experience is so different. So what would you say is the kind of difference if something's very common, you know, a lot of women are having this, it's very normal, quote unquote normal, or perhaps needs a bit more care?
I think having a bit of incontinence in the first 6 weeks is totally normal. I think experiencing pain can be also maybe common. I think what become abnormal or less common is women I see that is stop them from doing something and they don't even realize that they don't want to do that, or they like have the fear of going back to work or going to a social event. That's absolutely not normal.
And I think, as we've touched on here, pelvic floor recovery is something many women have heard of but don't necessarily understand. And often during pregnancy, or as women in general, women's health, it's often just reduced to just do your Kegels, without much explanation beyond that. And just to dig deeper into what the pelvic floor is, I know that you talk about it being like a rug. What happens to it during pregnancy and birth? Does it weaken? Does it relax maybe with the relaxin? What actually is happening during pregnancy and then birth to the pelvic floor?
I think the biggest thing to understand is your pelvic floor, your abs, and your diaphragm are connected. And that's something in global, and they are undergoes pressure. The role in pregnancy is to support the baby growth and all your organs, but you're full of relaxin. So your pelvic will get wider. Your pelvic floor might be, maybe we can call it distended, and it's going through strain because you're increasing weight with like water, baby growth, and so it's going under pressure. As a result, the body is incredible, because even if he goes under this pressure, it doesn't mean he doesn't have the ability to go back to his stage before birth. But what is important is to feel, to understand, and if I can go a bit further, understand the relationship with your abs. Because I have a lot of women who have no clue where the pelvic floor is, what does it do, and the relationship with the abs and the breathing. Because if you can put that in place a little bit before, you can actually even start your recovery from day 2 of being at hospital or at home. And that would be my biggest message, is through the pregnancy, you're gonna increase weight. Your pelvis will get wider. And the reason for that is because you're growing this baby. The role of the pelvic floor is to support that, support the growth of the baby, and to allow you to give birth vaginally, right? You know, you mentioned relaxing or straining. Throughout pregnancy, it's a stress, if we can call it. It's a challenge for the pelvic floor, but it doesn't mean it's not capable and that he will not go back to his shape post-pregnancy and postpartum.
Mm-hmm.
What is important is understanding what Kegels mean, understanding what breath works mean with your pelvic floor. Because if you can synchronize that, you can straight away, when you are in postpartum, go back and start rehabilitating your pelvic floor.
And what are the signs that a pelvic floor might need a bit of additional support? Pelvic floor and core in the postpartum phase. Are there any signs? We've mentioned incontinence, but are there any sign that your pelvic floor might need a bit more care and attention?
I think remember gravity. And I know we haven't touched that, but you know, someone in postpartum in 1 month to someone in postpartum 6 months to someone in postpartum in 18 months to someone who does gymnastic to someone who is sit on the chair, they might not have the same recovery timeline. And I think that's really important, because if after 1 month you still have a bit, when you sneeze, you know you just had a long COVID and you're sneezing and you have a leak, that is, you know, maybe something a bit common. But if in like 18 months you still have back pain and you are training and you are fully back at work, this is where you have to look and dig a bit deeper.
And is it possible to do pelvic floor exercises incorrectly or even too much? Is there a way of doing them? I think some people think they're doing them, but they might not be.
My biggest thing is to synchronize pelvic floor and breathing. So when you breathe in, you relax the pelvic floor because the diaphragm goes down to get the air in the lung. And when you breathe out, is when you lift and squeeze the pelvic floor.
And that squeezing sensation is,
yes.
What is that squeezing sensation? What are you squeezing?
You're squeezing your pee passage and your back passage.
Right.
So like if you're holding yourself.
Yes.
A lot of people actually don't realize that they are pushing. So when you examine them, and then they push everything out. And I think that's one of the biggest one is, if you test on the tone, everything is absolutely fine. But the misuse of them on the pelvic floor put them into a strain category where they can have stress incontinence.
And what does proper rehabilitation actually look like beyond the basics? You know, you hear doing your Kegel exercises during pregnancy, but what does proper rehabilitation actually look like? What should we be envisaging in the most ideal situation postpartum for a woman?
You know, you touch on France, and it's really funny because with Four Mamas, we've been working a bit in France, and it's, you know, I've looked at the guideline and it's insane. It's amazing what they have. You know, if you're a single mom and you have 2 kids, you even have like a 15 hours someone who can come and support you at home doing your chore. And I think that's my first point with rehabilitation, is to not jump onto the, you know, too fast. You're going to have to fight gravity once your baby is born. And that's the biggest probably danger for your pelvic floor. And I think in terms of rehabilitation, the first thing is to understand where it is, what your symptoms are, and how it works. Once you have done that, whether you have access to private healthcare, or whether, you know, you are an NHS patient and you go to the gym, if you have memorized and understand that, you can then, and this is what I do in my clinic, is you can incorporate it in your physical training. And the pelvic floor is no less such a muscle as a biceps. So when you go to the gym, you train your biceps, you train your pelvic floor.
And it's learning the basics of that. Like we know maybe, or someone who goes to the gym, what to do when you're doing a bicep or you're doing a tricep. curl, for example. But actually, if you actually learn, have the fundamental basics and the knowledge of what you need to be doing for your pelvic floor exercises, like you were saying about breathing, it is a game changer.
I think my biggest thing, if anyone listening to this podcast, is understanding how many times you go to the bathroom, because a lot of people hold themselves and that's like straining your bladder. It doesn't do anything. So if you're between 7 to 9 times a day and not with the urge, that's already training your pelvic floor. I have a lot of women, they come and they haven't pee for like, even myself, for like the whole morning. So this is really important. This is crucial to have a relaxed pelvic floor, not going into an overactive bladder. And then the number 2 is to understand what to squeeze and when to squeeze, and preferably when you're breathing out.
And I also remember you touching previously when we've had a conversation is the importance of, if you're having water, and obviously hydration is so important during pregnancy and postpartum, not waiting until you are absolutely to the max full and then needing to go to the toilet, actually going to the toilet as many times as you can in the day, just making sure that it's part of your routine in the day, rather than holding it for hours and hours and hours and then immediately needing a wee.
So doing that is actually quite common. If you ask me, a lot of people do it. Like I have more, it's a question. When I ask this question in my clinic, people have fear to answer wrong, like maybe 3, maybe 4. They fear to answer that they're going too much. But actually, most of the women don't go too much. They don't go enough. So if anything, that's number 1 is really important. And number 2 is to not push into the bathroom, to not go, I'm going to go and now I'm, emptying my bladder. That's what is important for me when I look at like urinary habit. And actually, it's kind of a fundamental of the pelvic floor.
Interesting. What I didn't expect actually was postpartum was just how much the rest of the body would be affected. My back, my shoulders, my posture, even how I was holding and feeding my baby. And I developed so many aches and pains that I didn't expect, especially in the early months, like carpal tunnel and mummy's wrist. And what does pregnancy and postpartum do to our posture and alignment, would you say?
It's an ambiguity, because you want to get strong to be able to support your baby. But as women, we also need this time of slow pace to heal. Healing time is the biggest component. And I think that's one of the biggest one is women often jump too fast into going into physical work, where they don't even, they don't realize that all they're doing at home, carrying the baby, carrying the shopping, pushing the buggy is already quite physical. So that's number 1. And
how is it affecting posture and alignment as well? What does pregnancy and postpartum do to change those?
So as I said, it's a hormonal dependence. So depending on who you are, as you said, we're all unique. We're not going to have the same pregnancy. One thing that is quite incredible is your pelvic will go wider and you kind of tilt the pelvic. And, your lordosis, your curve in your back will increase. Your muscle during pregnancy will relax. This is a role of relaxing. Okay. And sometimes you have a bit of a tilt forward. So you actually change completely your posture. And I see a lot of women in clinic, they come after and they're like, my jaw is so tight. And they're grinding teeth. And the reason is because the way they've been standing, the pelvis has tilt and there's a relationship and the jaw does the same. So what happened is once they go back and they strengthen their glute and they engage their core and the pelvis kind of align again, there's less and less tension in the jaw.
Wow. I had no idea that would even be affected. How common are these sources of pain, like the backs, the hip and the neck? Why do they happen? Obviously, we've touched on the jaw there, but even if you're breastfeeding, you are going to have this tension and the discomfort in your shoulders and in your neck, probably the way that you're sitting. How common are these sources of pain?
You were asking about common and normal. I think we're in a society where we are so demanding on women that this kind of normal what happened because you just gave birth and you're carrying a baby weight, which is heavy because you don't have any more muscle support. So all of this are common. I think what is not common is the attention we give into them. And I think, if there's one thing I will say is I remember doula saying, you should not carry more than your baby weight. Okay, there's a principle and there's a reality. And there's mother who are, a single mom, but they have, you have stairs. And I think if I can give one advice, and this is what I do in my clinic when they come to me pregnant, is look at how functional your life is. Like, do you have stairs? What is your buggy? Because that will allow you to not have such a strain and those pain coming into your body.
How can osteopathy support recovery during this time, other than avoid doing X, Y, and Z?
I'm going to be the advocate for osteopathy, but the biggest thing is during pregnancy, you can't take medication. And we work on the musculoskeletal system. So all I've been saying, like, your ribs get wider, your pelvic floor get wider, you're full of relaxing, all those changes, a bit like raw pain, they ache you. And it's incredible because you can go to a physical therapist, osteo, physio, whoever, someone that you trust and is regulated. They will help with those aches and pain. So if anything, you were talking about NHS or not, this is something that will be incredible because that will probably help women to carry on the daily life.
And what can we be doing, the small adjustments in the day-to-day support of our bodies? What would you say to someone if they're thinking that they want to improve their postpartum recovery, whether it's in the weeks or the months following just having had a baby? What are the day-to-day adjustments that we could make to improve our recovery?
My biggest thing is become aware of your pelvic floor, because the pelvic floor is the center. And if you can get this breathing right with your pelvic floor, you can do it while you push your buggy up the hill and really, fill your abs. You can, when you're lying down and you're going to turn onto your side to get up, you're going to be able to engage your core and your pelvic floor. That will be my biggest thing. Don't try to add on more things that we already have, but really try to synchronize this breathing in and breathing out with the pelvic floor on your day-to-day, routine. Fine if it's like pushing the buggy, cooking, or, when you're having the baby in the baby carrier, those type of things.
Even like you say then, is that even the pushing the buggy or cooking, breastfeeding, these are the moments, even especially if you're breastfeeding or if you're feeding your child, regardless, there's time there to think, okay, how am I breathing right now? How can I just practice your pelvic floor exercises?
It's a great one. You're breastfeeding or you're giving the bottle and you're seated on it. And you can just, there's so many things on breathing because you will slow down your cardiac rhythm. So you will get your baby more relaxed. So your adrenaline will come down and so on and so on. But yeah, if you can think about that, breathing out, squeezing your pelvic floor, and when you're breathing, relaxing your pelvic floor is incredible.
So helpful.
And if I can add something is, we know we're not all the same. And I often have women who come and they're really keen on, going back rapidly to exercise. And one of my biggest things for the London people, go up and down Primrose Hill with your buggy to your pelvic floor. Once you manage that, off you go and you can go back on training harder.
And there's often an unspoken expectation that by 6 weeks, you should be, quote unquote, back to normal. But for many women, that couldn't feel further from the truth. So how long does postpartum recovery actually take, realistically?
The benchmark of 6 weeks is for maternity care, and is usually because sometimes people have stitches or, that's the kind of like medical mark. Postpartum, we know now there's been people talking, and I'm sure you have people talking about matrescence. So it's a huge transformation that affects all the system we said before, and it can go up to 2-3 years. It's a transformation, a transition, a reorganization. So it's also an amazing opportunity for your body to get it stronger, fitter, and, plan for your next 10 years to come.
It's interesting you say that because I saw a video recently that was talking about the postpartum experience being, for example, like puberty. Yeah. And you wouldn't say puberty happens bang into a 6-week period. Pregnancy, 9 months, but postpartum, I think these arbitrary timelines of back to normal in 6 weeks, for a lot of people, it doesn't look like that. And I think it's really good to hear about. That's kind of the medical terminology of like perhaps a scar, or if there's been a tear, that we need to just have a better understanding that recovery doesn't mean you will have a recovery in 6 weeks, 6 to 8 weeks.
My analogy is this thing about puberty and pregnancy. Puberty takes a while, pregnancy takes a while, and postpartum, all of that. So it's long. And number two is, we think of, we get married. So when you get married, you're like 2 years, 3 years preparation, what dress, you go try every single thing. Once, and like quick, get pregnant. And once you're pregnant, quick, out of it. And I know it's hard and it's unfortunate, but if those moments we were actually sitting and reflecting and be like, oh, okay, What can I do? What can I do to make this recovery nicer for myself? That's what would I say to women, take your time. It takes time, and we're not equal to the recovery time. If I think you've been a long time marathon runner.
Yes.
And you have someone who sits on the desk all the time. It's two very different musculoskeletal profile. So your body memory is not going to imprint the same thing. So we have to take that in consideration.
And what would you say about the 6 to 8 week postpartum check or postnatal check that we have? Why is this, in my opinion, not a full measure of recovery? Because it's such a quick appointment. There's so many things to check. And I think that a true measure of recovery, there's so many elements that need to be discussed and assessed.
I think, as you said, NHS does an incredible work.
Absolutely.
And it's a benchmark to maybe make sure that there's not a stitches at the wrong place. Let's put it this way. But as you ask me, common and normal symptoms, this is where it doesn't stop. It goes all the way to up to 2-3 years. And even, a little bit later, there's no shame to say, something has happened. And not just there's no shame, it's still endurable recovery, that you can still redo, come back from those symptoms. So there's not too late time of recovering.
That's a good point to make, actually. I think a lot of people think that, say, if they've had a child, they're 2 years on, well, that's my recovery window.
For me, it's a little bit tricky because, I have women who come to clinic and they're like, oh, I had my 6-week check, so I'm fine. And I'm like, I don't know how to say to you, but you just mean that you may be not peeing on the floor, but it doesn't mean that you're not into a fragile state. This is what I advise. It doesn't mean everyone has to take it, but I really like the fact when you had your cycle 3 times. It's 3 is a big number in Chinese medicine. And once you're back to your cycle, you may be closer to normal in terms of hormones. And as we said, this is a transformation that is hormonal dependent, is probably going back to or going to something that is more familiar to your body. That's what I will call maybe the end of postpartum, physiological postpartum.
And what expectations do you think societally perhaps need to shift when it comes to healing?
I think these days women work and they are a big weight, big financial weight in society. And I think giving them the ability to heal properly will propel them to be a bigger asset to work. And I would really like that, maternity is not seen as a liability, but it's a strength, it's a force for the future, for, even an economic future. So I would really love society to not just give more time, but give, I know we also that give more support, but give more logical and common basic support. If you have a single mom who lives on the 3rd floor and, has to carry her shopping every day, it's not going to be the same as someone who has 3 nannies and, not have to lift her food shopping.
What would you say to someone who feels like their recovery is perhaps taking too long? And I think some people worry that the pelvic floor health or diastasis recti isn't recovering in the way that they expected or would want. So what advice would you have to someone who thinks, gosh, this recovery is taking a long time? Or perhaps they're thinking of perhaps a second pregnancy and they're thinking, have I recovered fully from my first? Is it going to be impacted with my second pregnancy? What advice would you have for someone?
Sometimes people who think their recovery is too long is often they might have symptoms before that hasn't been sorted. And I think, as I said before, it's an amazing opportunity to tackle all the symptoms. So really, take them, spend time on it. It's not a burden. I don't want to say this word of impatience, but maybe, change your focus. There's certain thing where it's revelation. I had women who come and don't understand. They're sneezing and they're leaking. And then I said to them, but how many times do you go to the bathroom? And I'm sorry to go back to this example, but it's so common. And they're like, oh. And then they come back and they're like, oh, it's really hard. I had to retrain this. But that's part of the recovery. And those little things, as simple as that, can completely transform your postpartum recovery.
Amazing. And also, like you said, to the point of it's never too late.
Yeah.
It's still never too late. Recovery is an ongoing process. It's not.
And the other one with someone who's going to have a kids like in the same run, they feel they haven't fully recovered. It's another transformation. So your next one might be a bit longer, might need a little bit more maintenance, but it doesn't mean you're not going to go back to what you would like to be or your new you.
And what we're going to do now is we're going to go into a quick fire round, which we call the 2 a.m. Google list, which are the questions many women end up searching in the middle of the night, but they shouldn't have to. So are you ready?
Yeah.
What is your number one tip to someone who has just had a baby when it comes to their body and recovery? Your number one tip?
Lie down.
Lie down.
Yeah, just stay lying, get people to serve you.
Get people to do things. Number 2, should you still feel pain weeks or months after giving birth?
Yes and no. Yes, it can happen. You still haven't had your period. You might be breastfeeding. You might still be full of relaxing. You might have a big baby. You might have had a strong instrumental birth. That's fine. Get checked.
Get checked.
Yeah.
And when should you see a specialist?
When you have a doubt, because even if you're in pain, it's okay to be in pain. What is not okay is to stay in pain.
Good point. And finally, what's one thing women are told during postpartum that isn't actually helpful? I mean, there are a lot of things that we're told, but what's one thing in particular that really grinds your gears?
For me, it's like, you're doing great. Postpartum, you're doing great. Like, you're on a show. You're not on a show.
Yeah. What does that even mean?
Exactly.
Before we finish, each week we ask our listeners to submit their questions so they can have advice directly from an expert. This week, we have a message that's been sent in from one of our A Long Way to Go followers called Kate, and here's what she has to say.
Hi there, my name's Kate, and I have a question, a slightly embarrassing question around postpartum incontinence. So I am 50 months postpartum now and have experienced some mild incontinence, mainly when I've been sick and coughing quite a lot, but it just made me worry slightly and wonder if there's something I could do to improve the situation. So do you have any recommendations for exercises or anything I can do to help?
Thank you for this question. First of all, there's nothing embarrassing to ask. I think it's 1 out of 3 women will have incontinence postpartum, so it's a lot of women. Number 2, you're still quite postpartum, so it means you still have probably a lot of hormone inside you, and your muscles are still recovering, they're still rebuilding. In terms of tips, for me, it sounds like you're having more stress incontinence over urge incontinence. With stress incontinence is when you cough or when you sneeze, you have some leakage. And urge incontinence is when you can't hold it. So you get somewhere and you have to go and you have some leakage. My first one would be go see someone who can assess your pelvic floor. That will be my number 1 tips. And my number 2 is look at breath work with abdominal breathing and pelvic floor. And it's really important that you integrate that into your exercise routine before you do anything else.
Amazing. And my final question to you is, what's one thing every woman should know about postpartum recovery?
I don't want to say it takes time, but it gets solid if you commit it to yourself. It makes you a new person that is so resilient, that your body gets so resilient and so strong. So don't give up on it, but give yourself some time.
You've been listening to A Long Way to Go with me, your host, Katie O'Malley. If this episode resonated, please share it with someone who might need to hear it. And if you have a question or story you'd like featured in future episodes, you can get in touch through our socials at A Long Way to Go Club. Wherever you are in your pregnancy or postpartum journey, there might be a long way to go, but we're here with you every step of the way. See you next time.